Welcome to the Sky Commander Flight Brief. It's your mission-ready podcast for drone pilot training and aerial insights across Canada.
From Transport Canada rules to real-world drone ops, we break it down, take you higher, and help you earn your wings. Because here at skycommander.ca, we don't just fly.
It hints there's more to it. It's a masterclass, a deeper level, maybe a philosophy or a community focus, perhaps.
It's definitely intriguing, sets them apart from just, a basic tips show. Skycommander.ca is the obvious next step. Precisely. If you're thinking about flying a drone in Canada, boom, this content is aimed right at you.
Powered by skycommander.ca.
The elite podcast for Canada's drone pilot. Okay, let's get started. Ready to unpack another fascinating stack of sources you sent our way.
And the expert guide, here to help connect the dots and find the most important nuggets of knowledge buried within.
Today, we're tackling a topic that's essential if you fly drones in Canada, navigating controlled airspace. It's incredibly practical, but as the sources show, it has layers of complexity that can trip up even experienced pilots. You've given us a fantastic collection, official regulations, some really eye-opening case studies, historical context, and insights from industry pros.
Exactly. Our mission for this deep dive is to cut through the noise and give you a clear understanding of Canada's drone airspace authorization system, specifically how it works through NAV Canada.
Right.
It's not just about knowing what buttons to push, but understanding the why behind the rules, the potential pitfalls, and what it really means for you if you're operating here.
Think of this as your shortcut, maybe, to understanding what happens behind the scenes when you request permission, why certain rules exist, and, how to avoid common traps that can lead to serious consequences.
Yeah, it's about elevating your knowledge beyond the basics to truly master the airspace.
Okay, let's unpack this stack and dive in.
Let's do it.
All right, first off, let's address something surprising right away from the sources. Who exactly is NAV Canada? Many people might assume it's a government body, like Transport Canada, but that's not the case.
No, and that's a crucial distinction the sources really highlight.
Okay.
NAV Canada is actually a private, non-profit corporation.
Private.
Yes. It was commercialized back in 1996, I believe, to manage Canada's civil air navigation system. They handle all the radar, the towers, air traffic control, basically. They're the keepers of Canada's airspace highways.
Okay.
And importantly for us, they are legally empowered to regulate access to controlled airspace for remotely piloted aircraft systems, or RPAS.
RPAS, right, the official term for drones.
Exactly. They're funded by fees from airspace users, including airlines, and yes, drone operators now too. You could absolutely think of them as Canada's air traffic bosses, or maybe even your airspace landlord.
Your airspace landlord. I like that. That analogy really sticks. So what specifically is this controlled airspace we're talking about, and why do you need permission from this landlord to fly there?
Well, controlled airspace is essentially the managed part of the sky where air traffic control, or ATC, is actively providing services to separate aircraft and manage traffic flow. It's fundamental for safety, especially around airports.
Makes sense.
For RPAS operators, flying inside these zones is prohibited without authorization. The sources use the analogy of needing a hall pass to enter a secured building. Controlled airspace is that secured building.
Okay, and the sources break down different classes of controlled airspace, right? What are the key ones for drone pilots needing this authorization?
They do. The most common classes requiring NAV Canada authorization for RPAS are Class C, typically found around major airports, very strictly controlled, often right from the surface, 0 feet AGL upwards.
Right from the ground, wow.
Yeah. Then there's Class D, usually at regional airports, where control might start a bit higher, perhaps 1,200 feet above ground level, AGL. And sometimes Class E, which is often for instrument flight rules, traffic, but can be controlled, so you definitely need to check if RPA's authorization is needed there too.
So here's where it gets really interesting. A key insight from the sources is that altitude isn't the main factor. You could be flying really low, say just 50 feet off the ground, but if you are located within controlled airspace boundaries that start at the surface, you absolutely still need authorization.
That's exactly right.
The sources give the example of Toronto Pearson, CYYZ, where Class C airspace starts at 0 foot AGL and goes out, 6 nautical miles?
That's it, 6 NM from the airport reference point.
Yeah.
If you're within that circle, even hovering just off the grass, permission is mandatory.
That's a critical point, I think, often missed by new pilots.
Absolutely. And the main tool provided for requesting this authorization in controlled airspace is called NAV Drone.
Okay, let's talk about that tool, NAV Drone. The sources describe it as your digital gatekeeper for controlled airspace access. How does the basic process work?
Well, it starts with knowing exactly where you plan to fly and checking if that spot falls within controlled airspace. You can use tools like VNC charts, visual navigation charts, or even NAV drone itself to check the map.
Okay.
If it is controlled airspace, you log into NAV drone, you'll need an account, and then you submit a flight request.
And what goes into that request?
It includes important details. You need your pilot certificate number. And specifically, it has to be an advanced certificate for controlled airspace.
Right, not the basic one.
Correct. You need your RPS registration number. Then you have to map out your planned flight area using a polygon tool right on their map. You specify your proposed maximum altitude in feet, AGL, and define your flight time window start and end times.
And submitting the request isn't just like an instant yes, is it? The sources suggest patience is often needed.
That's very true. While NAV Canada has introduced automated or instant approvals in some very specific low-risk areas.
Okay.
If you meet certain criteria like using a standard polygon size, no conflicting NOTAMs, staying below 100 feet AGL and pre-cleared corridors, that's definitely not the standard everywhere, especially not in busier areas.
So what's the recommendation?
The general guidance from the sources is submit your request at least 72 hours in advance. For complex or busy Class C airport zones, they actually recommend 5 or more business days.
Wow, okay.
Yeah, it really pays to submit early. And you should even test areas that seem similar, because eligibility and processing times can really vary location by location.
The sources repeatedly stress the importance of that polygon you draw in NAV drone. Why does polygon geometry, the shape and size, matter so much?
Oh, this is absolutely crucial. And it's a common stumbling block.
Yeah.
NAV Canada reviews that polygon very carefully.
They do.
Yes. Large, loose polygons that cover huge areas or stretch into sensitive zones like approach paths are far more likely to be rejected, or at least significantly delayed.
So you need to be precise.
Extremely precise. You need to use tight, efficient polygons that precisely surround only the area you actually need for your planned flight path. Overly broad requests can violate the principle of only asking for the least airspace required, which is a concept in the Canadian aviation regulations, the CARS themselves.
Oh.
And those broad requests get flagged by the system or the human reviewers. The case study of that survey company in Edmonton.
Yeah.
Their request got denied because their polygon was just sloppy. It extended unnecessarily into multiple sensitive approach zones, caused a 3-day project delay just because of the shape they drew.
So it's not just drawing a big circle around the general area you need to work in. It has to be like surgically precise.
Exactly. The sources explain NAV Canada uses an automated risk-weighted matrix to assess your request.
A risk matrix.
Yeah. Tighter, smaller polygons, requesting shorter time windows, proposing lower altitudes, and flying outside of peak airport hours. All these things contribute to a lower risk score in their system.
I see.
And those lower risk requests are much more likely to get faster approval. There was an example of a pilot getting approved in like 15 minutes for a really tight polygon. Under 60 meters, that's about 200 feet AGL for just a short duration flight. Optimizing those factors really helps.
And the response isn't always a simple approved or denied, right? What kind of responses might you get?
That's right. You might receive approved with conditions. This means you must strictly follow every single condition listed on that approval.
Like what kind of conditions?
Oh, things like maintaining visual line of sight, VLOS only, sticking to a specific maximum altitude, maybe only flying during daylight hours. You might also get pending clarification if they need more info from you. Or, of course, denied, usually with a reason given.
And it's vital to read those conditions carefully.
Absolutely vital. Read them, understand them, and strictly adhere to them.
Okay, so you've navigated NAV drone, submitted your request, drawn a beautiful tight polygon, and you've received an approval maybe with conditions. Does that mean you are absolutely good to go and launch your drone?
Not quite. And this is where, according to the sources, many otherwise diligent pilots get tripped up, and it can lead to serious consequences.
Oh.
NAV drone authorization is just one layer of the puzzle. You absolutely must perform other critical checks immediately before you launch. This is often the difference between a legal flight and a violation.
Okay, so what are these non-negotiables? What else do you have to check, even after getting NAV drone approval?
First and foremost, and this cannot be stressed enough, check NOTAMs notices to airmen and TFR's temporary flight restrictions.
NOTAMs and TFRs. Got it.
These override any prior NAV drone approval you received. No exceptions.
Seriously, they just cancel it out.
Instantly. The sources give powerful examples. A new VIP flight advisory route pops up, or maybe a wildfire starts nearby, creating a restricted zone. Oof! Your prior clearance can be instantly nullified. You are legally responsible for checking these notices immediately before launching, every single time, even if you were approved hours or days earlier.
That wildfire incident mentioned in the sources sounded particularly stark. A drone grounding 16 aircraft. That's huge.
It is. The case study involved a drone pilot who flew into a Class F airspace no-TAM zone. This zone was specifically created for firefighting aircraft during the BC wildfires.
Okay.
His flight, maybe he had good intentions, perhaps surveying the scene, but it grounded 16 vital aircraft for hours because he violated that no-TAM restriction. Good intentions don't override legal restrictions designed to protect emergency services and other aircraft.
That's a harsh lesson.
It is. And another scenario showed a pilot using an NAV drone approval from the previous day. They completely missed a new VIP advisory no-TAM that made their planned flight path illegal that morning.
So check NOTAM's TFRs right before launch. What else? Beyond those notices, what other resources do you need to cross-reference?
This is another crucial point about the layers. While NAV drone is the submission tool, the Designated Airspace Handbook, or DAH, is your official legal map of Canadian airspace.
The DAH.
It contains the precise legal descriptions, coordinates, vertical limits of controlled airspace, special use zones, all the official details.
And NA drone doesn't show all that.
The sources emphasize that NAV drone's visual map, while helpful, might not explicitly show everything. Things like specific, small heliport overlays or maybe subtle vertical transitions in airspace boundaries near tricky terrain.
Ah, the fine print, basically.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. You need to know how to read VNC charts and use the DAH to confirm the precise boundaries at your specific location. The hospital medevac interference case study is a perfect example.
What happened there?
A pilot had NAV drone approval, but was still found in violation because they failed to check the DAH. The DAH would have shown a critical hospital heliport overlay they were interfering with. It really highlights this need for using both the digital tool and the official publications.
So the DAH and VNCs fill in the critical details that the app might sort of gloss over.
Precisely. They are the legal source of truth for airspace geometry. You also need to reference sources like the Canada Flight Supplement, CFS.
CFS.
Yeah, it has detailed info about airports, or those VNC charts. Again, you need them for details on things like obstacle limitation surfaces, OLS.
Obstacle limitation surfaces? What are those?
They're basically invisible areas around airports designed to keep approach and departure paths clear of obstacles. Very important. You also need to be aware of runway approach-departure paths themselves and standard aircraft circuit patterns.
Okay.
These are absolutely critical, especially if you're operating within, say, 3 nm of an airport. You must not interfere with them, even if you have general airspace approval from NAV drone.
And that just outside trap scenario you mentioned?
Oh, right. That showed a pilot thinking they were safe by operating just outside the informal 3 nm advisory ring around an airport. But they were still inside controlled airspace boundaries listed in the DAH and VNCs. Led to an incident and a hefty fine, like $5,000.
Ouch. Okay. The sources also specifically mention heliports and hospital pads needing extra caution. What's the guidance there?
Yes, this is a point of specific focus. If you are operating within 3 nm, or maybe even 1 nm according to one source of a certified heliport, particularly hospital rooftop pads, you need extreme caution, possibly specific consideration in your request.
Why are they so sensitive?
Well, they're often located within Class E control zones supporting instrument approaches, and they're highly sensitive, especially during emergency flights, medevacs. Proximity can trigger extra scrutiny or denial of your request.
And they might not show up clearly on NAV drone.
Exactly. Crucially, you need to check the DAH and CFS for their exact locations and any associated procedures, as they might not always be clearly or accurately depicted in the visual tools.
What about pilots with jobs requiring flights at multiple locations? Can you just submit one NAV drone request for, say, 3 different spots in the same city?
The sources are clear on this. No, NAV drone currently does not allow a single request for separate flight locations.
Really? Even if they're close?
Even if they're in the same city. If the polygons you draw don't physically touch on the map, they require individual separate requests. Trying to bundle them will likely just get rejected or cause significant delays.
Good to know. And does getting NAV drone approval mean you can skip your physical site assessment? Like NAV Canada approved it, so the site must be safe.
Absolutely not. That's another critical layer of responsibility the authorization doesn't replace.
Okay.
NAV drone authorizes your use of the airspace. But you are still legally required by the CARS to conduct a thorough site survey before every flight. You have to ensure you can maintain safe, visual line of sight VLOS throughout the entire mission. You have to ensure you can avoid all persons not involved in your operation.
So the approval doesn't cover ground hazards or VLOS issues?
Not at all. It's not a substitute for executing compliant site procedures. In fact, most NAV drone authorizations explicitly include VLOS as a required condition anyway.
This really highlights that concept of dual layers of compliance the sources mention. It's not just about getting NAV Canada's permission.
That's a key takeaway, definitely. ND Canada is the gatekeeper for airspace access in controlled areas. But Transport Canada remains the regulator for RPAS conduct, pilot certification, and aircraft compliance.
Right.
And the sources give a crucial trap example here. You could have a perfectly valid NAV drone authorization, but still be operating illegally.
How?
If you haven't registered your drone with Transport Canada, for instance, or if you haven't met your pilot recency requirements, like flying within the last 24 months or doing the required training, or even if you just don't have your pilot certificate, your RPAS registration, and the NAV drone authorization documentation physically with you during the flight.
You need all that paperwork on you.
Yes. Missing any of those Transport Canada requirements makes your entire operation non-compliant and illegal, even with airspace approval from NAV Canada. The dual-layer authorization failure scenario illustrated this. Someone had NAV drone approval, but still got in trouble because they missed local heliport restrictions detailed in the DAH. Relying only on the app wasn't enough.
So getting that NAV Canada Hall Pass for the airspace doesn't excuse you from needing your Transport Canada driver's license and vehicle registration, and you still have to drive safely and responsibly.
That's a solid analogy for these two distinct but interconnected layers of regulation. Absolutely.
And speaking of responsible airspace use, what if you get approval but then plans change and you don't fly?
Good question. If you receive an authorization in NAV drone but then decide not to fly, it's considered good practice and professionalism to actually go back into the system and withdraw your request.
Why is that important?
Well, it frees up that block of airspace for others who might need it, helps keep the system from getting cluttered with unused requests, and frankly, it helps maintain your good standing and reputation with NAV Canada.
Makes sense. Are there situations where even with a NAV drone approval, you still need to speak directly with air traffic control?
Yes, though it's not the default situation. If your NAV drone approval document includes a specific condition like coordinate with ATC on and lists a radio frequency, you are legally obligated to contact ATC, usually via radio if you have that capability, or maybe by phone, to confirm deconfliction with current traffic immediately before you take off.
So you really need to read every word of that approval.
Every word. It's essential to know how to identify these coordination requirements if they're included.
The sources also make it very clear that your NAV Canada authorization is less like an impenetrable shield and more like a binding contract.
That's a really powerful concept they introduce, and it's accurate. That approval document does not protect you from breaking other CARS rules like flying directly over people not involved in your operation or violating VLOS or flying recklessly.
Right.
It does not override or give you permission to ignore fire, military, or security NOTAMs or TFRs. And frankly, if an incident does occur, investigators will scrutinize that authorization document meticulously.
And any deviation.
Any deviation from specific conditions, the exact polygon boundaries, the approved altitude, the time window, any coordination requirements can absolutely be used against you in an enforcement action.
So it's not just permission, it's accountability.
Exactly. The sources suggest thinking of each authorization less like a simple permission slip and more like a mini special flight operations certificate, an SFOC, where you are the accountable operator for every single detail.
And what are the potential consequences if you don't follow these rules, especially regarding airspace authorization? The case study sounded pretty serious.
They are. The ramifications can be severe and far-reaching. Flying without required authorization in controlled airspace or flying with authorization but outside the approved parameters.
Yeah.
Those are direct violations of the CARS. Specific sections like 901.27 prohibited flight and 103.02 enforcement apply. Penalties can include significant fines. We're talking up to $5,000 for an individual, $25,000 for a corporation for a single violation, and those can be compounded.
Wow, $25,000.
And there could be additional suspension fine, potentially $15,000. Beyond fines, you could face pilot certificate suspensions, civil lawsuits if you cause damage or injury, denial of insurance claims.
It really adds up.
And in extreme cases, even criminal prosecution. The case study of the company that was rejected from bidding on a six-figure contract.
Because of a past incident.
Exactly. Because of a past unauthorized flight incident, which was documented in Transport Canada records. It shows the lasting damage a single mistake can have on your professional reputation and livelihood.
That's a huge wake-up call. Okay, let's quickly touch on some common misconceptions the sources highlight that can lead pilots astray.
Sure. The big ones they point out are assuming that just because you're flying under 400 feet AGL, you don't need authorization. That's false. It depends entirely on whether you are in controlled airspace, regardless of altitude.
Right, like that Class C from the surface example.
Exactly. Another is assuming you'll always get instant approval. False. Plan ahead, especially in busy areas. Assuming you can just resubmit the exact same request if it's denied. False. Something fundamental about the request needs to change.
Like the polygon or altitude.
Right. Something needs to address why it was denied. And don't assume being near a controlled airport always requires authorization. It only does if you're inside the actual controlled airspace boundary. But even just outside, you still need heightened traffic awareness, obviously.
Okay. According to the sources, what sets apart someone who truly masters this area of drone operation in Canada? What does that look like?
Well, it's going far beyond just being able to, click the buttons in the NAV drone app. It's about developing a deep understanding of how to read and interpret the official publications like the DAH and VNCs fluently.
Really knowing the source material.
Yes. Maybe even overlaying that data with maps on your own planning tools. It's knowing the nuances of drawing polygons, strategically minimizing risk, avoiding sensitive areas like those protected OLS surfaces, understanding how time of day and flight duration factor into that risk assessment matrix NAV Canada uses.
Seeing it from their perspective almost.
Kind of, yeah. It's knowing the legal landscape inside out and the serious consequences of non-compliance. The sources even mention that true mastery involves being able to simulate missions mentally using these different data layers and maybe being able to confidently explain to manned aviation stakeholders like pilots or airport operators why your flight won't interfere with their operations.
It's about becoming a really well-informed and responsible airspace user.
That sums it up perfectly.
The sources also give us a quick look at the history. How did we get to this NAV drone system?
Yeah, it's been a pretty rapid evolution, actually. Before 2019, most non-recreational flights in controlled airspace in Canada required a full SFOC, a Special Flight Operations Certificate.
SFOC.
And that was a manual application process. Could take weeks, sometimes longer. The big shift came in June 2019 with the updated CARS Part 9X regulations. That created the Advanced Drone Pilot Certificate and opened the door for access to controlled airspace using a new authorization mechanism, which NAV Canada was tasked with managing.
And NAV drone came after that.
Yes. NAV drone itself was developed starting in late 2020, really as a direct response to the huge growth in drone operations. It launched in 2021 to digitize and streamline this whole authorization process.
And it's been evolving since.
Definitely. We've seen continuous improvements like those auto approvals in certain low-risk zones, and ongoing updates to the DAH, and stricter advisories on compliance, like some recent ones mentioned for 2025.
And looking ahead, where is the system heading according to the sources? What's next?
The sources point towards a future that's increasingly integrated and automated. We're talking about unmanned traffic management systems, UTM.
UTM, heard that term.
Yeah. This will likely include elements like remote ID, basically a digital license plate for drones, broadcasting identification and location info.
Okay.
Automated deconfliction between drone and manned aircraft traffic, and potentially even machine-to-machine authorization processes down the road.
So less human intervention.
Potentially, in some aspects. NAV Canada is already piloting systems for real-time mission negotiation and shared airspace dashboards. The sky is becoming a more automated, data-rich environment. Future systems might even involve AI reviewing and approving your requests in near real-time based on dynamic airspace conditions.
Wow, okay. So this deep dive into the sources really reveals that navigating Canadian-controlled airspace isn't just about downloading an app and clicking a button in NAV drone.
Nope, far from it. It's about understanding that NAV Canada is your airspace landlord. The polygon you draw is essentially a legal contract specifying exactly where, when, and how high you can operate.
And that your approval is always conditional.
Always conditional and potentially revocable. You need to layer your checks. NAV drone approval is necessary, yes, but you must also check NOTAMs, TFRs, cross-reference with the DAH, VNCs, and CFS.
And always ensure your Transport Canada compliance is squared away.
Exactly. Your valid pilot certificate, current registration, recency requirements, all up to date and on hand.
It's a complex, multi-layered system built on regulations, tech tools, and ultimately your personal responsibility as the pilot in command.
Understanding these nuances is absolutely essential, not just for staying legal, but for ensuring the safety of everyone in the sky and protecting your own operation, your reputation, and maybe even your livelihood.
It's truly fascinating how many different sources of information you need to consult to fly safely and legally, and how much is really on the pilot's shoulders to manage all that. Being well-informed here isn't optional, it's completely foundational.
Absolutely, and it's a system that's adapting incredibly quickly to the rapid evolution of drone technology itself.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Thinking about that future you mentioned, with UTM, remote ID, maybe AI reviewing flight plans, how does your role as a human pilot change in that world? What skills become the most valuable when the airspace itself becomes an increasingly automated system? Is it about learning to negotiate with algorithms, mastering complex data interfaces, or something else entirely?
Definitely something to mull over as we look to the future of flight.
Indeed. That's a wrap on today's mission, Commander. See above, go beyond, get ahead. For more training, tools, and intel, head to skycommander.ca. If you learned something new, share it, subscribe, and leave us a 5-star debrief.